Welcome. This is part 2 of Mindfulness of the Mind. And we are going to continue to work with mental talk and mental image as the object of focus in our practice in this class. So last week, we explored witnessing and observing mental talk and mental image. And we're going to be doing much the same thing this week, just with a slight twist. So if you weren't here for the last one, you can watch the replay, or you can just dive in here. You don't necessarily need the replay, but it is available. So you may have noticed when working with thoughts, when working with mental talk and mental image, that they are dynamic. They're constantly moving and changing. So the same way that right now, if you tune into the sound of my voice, it's moving and changing, right? Like it's not just this solid static thing. It's getting louder, it's getting softer, it's moving faster, it's moving slower. I'm exaggerating it here, but you get my point. There's a constant movement and change with the sound of the words I'm saying. We could also call that flow. So we're going to call it flow for the purposes of today's class. Flow meaning movement and change. So the same way you can notice the flow in my voice, in the sound of my voice, you can notice that flow within your own thoughts, the arising and passing of mental talk and mental image. And this is a really powerful way to work with the mind for a bunch of reasons. I want to tell you a little personal story about how I found this to be incredibly helpful for me in a very challenging experience. So some of you have heard this story before, but I'll share it again. So I don't know about you, but for me, especially in my life when, I was a little younger, a little less able to kind of soothe myself, calm myself, not as skilled with working with my mind as I am today after a bunch of years of practice. Going through a breakup would be one of the most one of the things that would create the most kind of negative and obsessive activity in my mind. And I remember, even if I was the one doing the breaking up, like it didn't matter, like breakups would just create a lot of mental activity for me and bring up a lot of emotion. But the mental activity is what I'd get really, really caught in. And it's what would cause me to say and do things that I maybe later regretted. So I started meditating and practiced for a number of years, and then had the opportunity to go through a breakup. And it was with someone I really, really loved, didn't want to break up with. I didn't want the relationship to end. And it seemed like it was the only option at the time, but it was not what I wanted. And so, of course, that's going to increase the mental activity, right? Like, well, what if I had said this? What if I had done that? What if I had tried this? Well, why did they say that? Blah, 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 on and on and on, right? The broken heart, there's the experience, the actual physical experience, but the mind will have a heyday with a broken heart. And so me and this person had our kind of like last conversation, we ended up getting back together, by the way, but we had this last conversation, the final sort of like, well, I guess we won't be seeing each other anymore for a while, and, goodbye, that whole thing. And, we were past the breakup sex point. Like this was like the final. It wasn't the like, let's have sex a few more times and then it's over. It was like the final moment. And they left and I was alone in my apartment. And the mind started going, you know, and I was like, okay, I know how to work with this. I can observe the arising and passing of this thinking. I have that ability. I have that practice through the focus on mind technique. So I did that. I observed it. It gave me a little bit of space, right? There was still a lot coming up, but it did give me some space. It gave me enough space to go to sleep. But what do you know, if that mental talk didn't wake me up like an hour later? I woke up with the mind going, why didn't you do this? Why didn't he say this? Well, you should have, could have, would have, blah, 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 right? Like on and on and on and on. It woke me up. It was so active. And I was like, whoa, okay. So I started again practicing, you know, noticing the mental talk, noticing the mental image, getting some space, separating it out from what was happening in my body, right? Just bringing this mindfulness to the experience. But this kept happening. It happened multiple times throughout the night. And at a certain point, what I did is I switched over to a different version of focus on the mind, which is to use flow, to notice in particular the movement and the change that was happening in the mind. And so I started, rather than just observing, okay, there's thoughts, I observed, okay, there's flow. There's this sort of dynamic, alive, flowing experience that's occurring in mental image and mental talk. And that helped me to get some space from the content, because I was noticing, instead of the thoughts, I was noticing the activity, the flow of the thoughts. So it stopped resonating so much as content. It stopped having so much meaning, and it just started having this like, I'm like all about the sound effects today, evidently. So anyway, it was like this flow of activity. And that kind of like allowed me some even more space. And I went back to sleep. And then it woke me up one more time. And this final time, I tuned right into the flow. And what I noticed, that it wasn't just like a sound and a sort of visual experience of flow. As I worked with it this way, it started to feel like a physical flow. And these words and images that earlier were causing suffering because they were about this breakup, they were about this broken heart, they started to become this like gentle rocking. And it was as if the thoughts were actually just rocking me back to sleep. And it was so beautiful and also kind of funny. I started to laugh. I had some joy arise in the moment, like, wow, this thing that throughout my life, from my very first breakup at 14, and I had a lot of breakups, by the way, a lot of relationships, which is why I now support couples, is because I had a lot of practice. I learned a lot. So I went through a lot of breakups, and throughout most of my life, it would cause me immense suffering. And so these thoughts that used to cause me so much suffering were now actually rocking me to sleep. And it was amazing to me. So amazing that it actually brought up joy, and I started laughing. I'm not going to say that it was like totally easy after that, and you know, that breakup didn't bring me any suffering or sorrow. It's not true. But the tools, and this tool in particular at this time, really decreased the suffering. So that's an example of how working with flow in thought might be helpful. Another way that flow with thinking might be helpful is that it starts to show you the impermanence of thought. It's just constantly moving and changing. There's nothing solid there. There's nothing to hold on to and say, that's me, that's true, that's reality, because it's just constantly changing and moving. It's impermanent. And this insight into impermanence, well, that can lead to all sorts of shifts in the way that we experience ourselves and experience others and experience life and experience the world and experience reality. But at the, you know, very basic level, recognizing that our thoughts are impermanent decreases our suffering. This too shall pass. And when you observe the flow of thinking, you really truly start to get that this too shall pass. Now, not that long ago, I went through a really challenging period. And it went on for a couple of years, but about a year was the hardest year I've ever had. And that's saying a lot because I've had a kind of a colorful life with a lot of ups and a lot of downs. But this was the most challenging period, I believe, that I've ever had. And I never lost touch with impermanence, that it wasn't always going to be like that. Even if parts of me believed, oh, I'm just going to feel this way forever, I knew, because of that insight of impermanence that we can glean through this practice of flow, that it would pass. This too shall pass. So luckily that time did pass, I'm happy to say. But because I'm a human being, I'll have other challenging times, no doubt. Tragedy, death, these things are non-negotiables for human beings. And so having tools to be able to process and work through those really hard times, really, really helpful. So there's tons more to say about this, but I think that's enough for now. I think we should do the practice. So we'll begin by doing what we did in part 1 of this series, which is just observing mental talk and mental image. Again, if you haven't done part 1 yet, don't worry about it. You'll be able to jump right in here. After we get warmed up with witnessing, observing in a mindful, accepting, curious way, the activity of the mind, we'll shift into specifically noticing the flow, the movement and change that's happening in the mind. And as we do that, you'll have the option to just notice mental talk or just notice mental image or notice both. And you're really invited to let go of separating the two strands out if you move into working with both. You can just notice the flow of the mind rather than needing to be like, this is the flow of mental talk and this is the flow of mental image. So in part 1, we separated those two out, which is important and helpful. And you can still do that today, but this is just another option that you can just allow them to flow together. That was not very flowy, what I just did with my hands. I tried to do a flowy motion and I just bumped my hands into each other. So there you go. All right. Something actually I want to say before we move on is that I was going back and looking through some old classes because I have tons of these classes available on Facebook, and then some of them on IGTV, but really only since the pandemic started. But on Facebook, I have them going all the way back to 2017. And so I was going through and I was trying to find one in particular, and I was watching one that was live, because I used to do this live with people and live stream at the same time. And I was making one of my silly jokes or talking about my hands bumping into each other, whatever. And there were people there laughing. And I just realized doing this virtually, I have no idea if the things I say are funny, are interesting. I mean, I hope they're somewhat interesting, but I don't get that feedback of your laughter when I make a silly joke. And I miss it. I miss it. I miss being with you in person, and look forward to when that day returns. Okay. So let's move into the practice. Again, finding a posture that's really supportive for you today. Classically, we'd like to have a nice long spine. Classically, we'd like to be still or be as still as possible. You're welcome to follow that if you want to sit very still with a very, very upright. as you can see, I'm leaning back. That's what my body needs. When I'm doing these live streams, it's just more supportive for my body to sit like this. When I meditate on my own, I tend to sit on the floor, half lotus or Burmese style with, a nice long back. That's what works best for me in that situation. You get to decide what works best for you today. So is that sitting up straight and still, or is that maybe curling up in bed, putting some blankets on you and a pillow under your head and doing the practice that way? You get to decide what's best for you. So take a moment and decide how you want to embody your practice today. And then as you're ready, you can close your eyes if that's what works best for you. It's different for different people. And we'll begin by inviting some relaxation into the body, and then we'll move into the practice. So start by bringing attention to your forehead, your eyebrows, and your eyes, softening and relaxing this area of the face and head. And then moving down to the mouth and the jaw and inviting the jaw to release and soften. Maybe releasing the tongue from the roof of the mouth. Maybe letting the mouth drop open a little bit. And then inviting that relaxation down into your neck and your shoulders. And we relax in a relaxed way. So don't feel that you need to relax perfectly. There's no such thing as far as I'm concerned anyway. We're just relaxing to whatever degree our body is willing to relax today. We're setting an intention for relaxation. We're inviting the body to relax. And then the body gets to decide. Relaxing down your arms and into your hands. And beginning to relax into the torso, softening the chest. Softening down into the solar plexus. Into the lower abdomen. Coming around to the back and inviting relaxation into your upper back. Relaxing into your mid back. And relaxing into your lower back. And then we'll bring some attention to the hips, to the seat, to the pelvic area, relaxing and softening here wherever available. And relaxing down both of your legs. And into your feet. And we'll take a moment here to tune into resource. So, as a reminder, that's something neutral or maybe all the way up to pleasant in your body. And as always, if there's not something available in the body, you can go external, a sight or a sound, or even into the mind, creating a positive thought. But if there's something available in the body, let's start there. And since we just went through and relaxed the body, there's probably some spots that feel pretty good, or at the very least neutral. And so bringing your attention to a spot that feels particularly good or particularly neutral, a spot that can be a resource for you. And drop your attention there for a moment. At any time during our practice, this practice of working with the mind, you can always come back to resource. It might not be the same spot. It could be, but it could be that it's in a different spot. You're always welcome to go to resource anytime during this practice and during your life. And resource is just something that's neutral, that's maybe pleasant, that feels maybe grounded or safe. A place where there's not a lot of activation. So anytime you need it, you can tune into resource. So if you'd like, now we'll shift into the focus on mind practice. And we'll begin by observing mental talk and mental image. Now, you might choose to observe one or the other, or you might choose to move back and forth between them. We are not attempting to quiet our minds. We are not attempting to change what we're thinking. We are just noticing that thinking is happening. We're bringing a curious, accepting, even kind attention to the activity of thought. If you like, you can label mental talk as talk and mental image as image. The labels are there to facilitate mindfulness. They're not a mantra. They're not a command. It's neutral. It's maybe every 3 to 5 seconds, just to acknowledge what it is that you're focusing on. The labels are optional. They're there as a support. If they're not supportive, don't use them. So for the next couple of minutes, we're just going to mindfully witness, observe, deconstruct the activity of mental talk and mental image. For a deeper dive on this, afterwards, you can go back and you can watch part 1 of this series. Anytime you get pulled into the content of the mental talk or mental image, that's a moment to recognize, oh, I woke up. I had gone unconscious into my thinking, and I've woken up. I can come back to mindfully witnessing, observing, deconstructing the activity of thinking. It's no big deal. Happens to all of us. We all get pulled into the mind. If there are no thoughts, that's fine. Just hang out with your quiet mind until some thoughts arise. If you find that you're getting pulled in to the thoughts a lot, going unconscious in the thoughts a lot, the labels can be helpful. And if you're using the labels, they might sound something like this: talk, image, image, talk. So it's nice and neutral. And I don't need to label every thought. I'm just using the labels every 4 or 5 seconds to acknowledge what's there. And if there's nothing happening, great, that's fine too. No label needed, no creation of thought needed. Just notice the quiet. Notice the empty space. Remembering that that's not the goal of this practice. It's just something that might happen. Keeping the eyes relaxed. There can be a tendency to tighten the eyes up as a way to concentrate on the thoughts, but the more you can keep the eyes relaxed, the less likely you end up with a headache from the practice. So keeping the eyes and the face and the temples nice and soft as you mindfully attend to this activity of the mind. Okay, now you are welcome to continue working with the mind in this way, just simply observing the arising and passing of mental talk and mental image, or going back to relaxation or resource. So you have lots of options here. If you'd like to continue on with me, we're going to slightly shift and start to notice, in particular, the flow of the mind, the movement and change of thought. So we're going to tune into the sort of contentless musicality of the mental talk and the contentless sort of dancing of mental image. Doesn't matter what the words or the images are, we're tuning in to the fact that they are moving and changing, that they are flowing. Now, if you'd like a label for this, you can use the label flow. And that's just to acknowledge that you are noticing, that you are witnessing, getting curious about the flow of mental talk and or mental image. So you can really let go of needing to separate the two, and you can let go of any sort of attachment to the content here. You already had that invitation, but I'm just going to give that to you even more here because it simply doesn't matter. We're just noticing the flow, the activity, the building and the expanding and the contracting and the falling away, the movement of the mind. Flow. 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 When you get pulled into the content, which will happen, you're a human being, come back to noticing the flow of the thinking. And if there is no thinking, you might be aware of the flow of emptiness and silence. There might be a kind of flow in the visual field, even when there's not images. There might be a kind of flow in the mind, even when there's not words. Also, if you've been practicing this for a while and you're practiced at observing the mind, you might notice a sort of churning underneath the surface of consciousness, of thinking, like pre-born thoughts. And there can be a very flowy quality to that. I think I used the word churning, right? That's movement and change. Maybe you're at the point where you're just catching the tail end of a thought or the tail end of an image. Catching that tail end is noticing flow. It's flowing through. These are all possible ways that you might be aware of flow in the mind. Anything you're thinking, including, I'm doing this wrong, is made of thought, and that thought is moving and changing. So we're using the word flow here to signify movement and change. There are other ways to use the word flow, but in this practice, this is simply to say movement and change. We'll continue to witness the flow, the movement and change of the mind with kindness and curiosity and lots of acceptance. Anytime you get pulled in, anytime you find yourself lost in the flow of thinking, come on back to observing in this kind, curious, accepting way. We'll spend just a few more minutes here. So see if you can really just commit to the practice for the next few minutes. Coming back again and again to observing the flow of thinking. We are not trying to get rid of or change the thoughts. We're just noticing how they move and change. We're not trying to create thoughts. If there's thoughts there, notice the flow. If there's not, then be with the quiet and maybe notice the flow in the quiet. Okay. Nice work. Take a moment to bring your attention back to your body, back to just feeling the sensations that are available. Maybe noticing if there's any spots that want to relax a little bit. Maybe simply feeling the sensation of your body making contact with whatever you're sitting or lying on. Then if your eyes are closed, you can start to slowly blink them open, coming back to the space that you're in. Thank you so much for practicing with me. Really good to practice with you.